Howdy, welcome to my run cast. This is my first run back after my fight last week. I split open my shin in my fight, so I went back to weightlifting pretty quickly, went back to training slightly slower than I normally do, and came back to running pretty slow. I can take the stitches out on Friday, today's Wednesday, so I'm pretty close. I think that the wound is sealed, but I can train on it. Just I don't kick on that side, and I just knee on that side, and all this stuff, and it's fine. But the reason I'm mentioning this being my first run back is it sucks. I was not looking forward to this run because I kind of knew it was going to be rough. Having today is a little bit more than a week since my normal training, so it's been one of those things where when you take time off and you have to come back to it, you have rested, so your body has done some recovering, and rest is important and that kind of stuff. But resting does not make you better at working out. It's just a necessary thing to do periodically in order to keep everything functioning. But taking time off does not make you a faster runner or more endurance or whatever. There is such a thing as detraining, and I don't feel that bad. Actually, the run is not as hard as I thought it was going to be. It's just I'm definitely not feeling oh, I'm so well rested, I'm just gonna power all the way through this. I'm not itching to run. I'm just have to get back to running because it's putting dimes in the piggy bank kind of thing. I've gotten into a couple of internet arguments over the past couple of days, which is it's not something I like to do. I am not someone who cracks my knuckles and goes on the keyboard in order to state my opinion and argue with people. I hate arguing with people. But occasionally there's stuff that I'm this is stupid, and people are going to read this and think that this is real because nobody is arguing it. And so I go on and say an alternative. I'm about to pass these 8-year-olds riding a motorbike. Look at that. There's 3 of them. Combined age is probably 24 years old riding a motorbike. So I don't know, it puts me in a bad mood. One of the reasons I don't argue online is because I don't like doing it and it pisses me off, but I also get mad at what's being said, and so I feel kind of obligated to, not in an argumentative way, but kind of state the opposing idea, just so that people reading it don't think that this is a unanimous, single voice in one direction kind of thing. Woo, but it's annoying. I don't know how you guys do it. There are people who go on there and just argue all day. Kevin will engage with people online much more than I will. And it's just, it's so draining. But there's something I was thinking about I wasn't arguing about this online, but this does have to do with me seeing people's comments online, not arguing with them, but being what the fuck? There are fights that will take place, right? So you watch a fight on TV or online or however it is that you watch your fights, and then you're oh my god, the person who won that fight is so amazing, the person who lost that fight is so shit. Just these kind of universal statements about what each of those fighters is capable of or what they are based on that fight. And this is exactly what, if you've done any kind of mental training, they teach you not to do about yourself. Never use universals about yourself. If you have a bad day of training, that doesn't mean you suck. If you win a fight, that doesn't mean you're the greatest ever. Don't use universals. This is something you're not supposed to do with yourself because it's bullshit. You also shouldn't do it with other people because similarly, it's total bullshit. But there were a lot of fights over the weekend, and so this is on a number of different promotions, but people are really being nasty to this one fighter, talking about how they don't train hard and they're so bad and they're making excuses and blah blah blah. And Kevin and I happen to know this fighter. I've fought her, followed her career a little bit, so I know what she's looked like and what she looks like now. She's actually changed quite a bit since the time that I fought her. This was not her best. This was not her best. What is the word? Performance. But at the same time, she was not in the game. It was definitely a one-sided fight in terms of she was not going to win that fight in any way, shape, or form in the decisions she was making and the things she was able to do within it. It was just no way. But she wasn't out of it. It's not like she was just a punching bag or something like that. And people are kind of acting like that's what that was. But it's very hard when you go against someone whose technique is shouting over you. Like, there are Western fight strategies and ways that they train people that is just literally shouting over someone. So it's just like high volume, relentless striking. It's not a lot of thinking. Like, you're not like choosing to do this strike over that one. It's a lot of comboing. I don't mean to be super disparaging of it, because it wins fights. Like, you do win like this, but it's kind of button mashing, which is a phrase that comes from like when you're playing, I don't know, Mortal Kombat as a kid and you don't actually know what the control does, so you just hit a bunch of buttons and the character flails around a lot and you can manage to defeat either the computer itself or, you know, your brother who's playing another character, something like that. It's a little bit of a button mashing thing. And again, well, this is not like that is not a smart, strategic, like really experienced fighter. It does win fights. Like, it is a skill. Like, you have to train it. It's not something that's just like going in and windmilling. It's a specialty skill set, I guess. That it's not like a fight IQ, fight experience. Like, I'm actually in this space. It's just going and doing the thing that you've trained in your gym in a ring. It works. Like, it works against some things. It won't work against a really, really good fighter who understands spacing and who can keep you at a distance. Like, you'll see this when powerful, bigger, but less experienced fighters go in against like a really, really good experienced Thai. They just get juggled, and it's like incredible to watch. But this is the thing, is that like, if you've never seen either of those fighters and you just base how good someone is off of this one fight, you're completely making ridiculous assumptions in both directions on the capabilities and skills of both of those fighters. And it reminded me, I used to be an admin on the gym page of my gym. So I basically would just answer private messages from people who were like, can I come to your gym? I'm going to be there in this time, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, yeah, like, just because I speak English is why I was doing this job. And I remember there would be people who, this is neither here nor there, but it's just a point, maybe a bit of advice for people. Thailand does not have a like 3 months in advance time scale. You can't plan things here 3 months in advance. That's not how Thailand works. Like, Thailand doesn't know what's going to happen even like a month ahead generally. So don't plan 3 months ahead for like a private or something like that. When you're within 2 weeks maybe of landing or being where you want to go, then you can try to book a private. But if you try to book something really far in advance, people don't really think on that time scale and they'll forget about it. Or by the time it's time for you to show up and have your private, they're like, oh, my nephew is getting ordained, and that will absolutely take precedent. And while it's really important for you, you're like, I flew all the way to Thailand and I want to do this private and I set it up. It's not super important to the person that you booked it with. The ordination of their nephew is really important. So, word of advice, don't try to plan things super, super far in advance. For the most part, anything more than a month is too far ahead in Thailand. But I would get messages from people who are like, I'm coming with my team and I want my 3 fighters to be able to fight. Can you book fights for them in advance before we get there so that I know that it's done? And I'd always just have to answer these people, and I'm like, look, they can't book anything for you until they've seen your students in the gym. And these people would try to like send me videos of their students. And I'm like, this doesn't mean anything to the Thai trainers who are looking at it for 2 reasons. One is, if you have 2 Westerners fighting each other in the ring, I don't know what I'm looking at. Like, I'm so used to looking at Thailand's style of fighting. When people send me fights from, New York or Europe or whatever the thing is, and they're like, tell me what you think of this fight. And I'm like, I don't know what I'm looking at. Like, this is so far outside of what I can understand. I honestly can't tell you anything about what's going on. When trainers are looking at a video of 2 Westerners and they don't know how good either of them are, they can't make an assessment of how good your fighter is because they don't know what it is they're looking against, right? If they see your fighter against a Thai who they can kind of like assess how good that Thai is, then they can make an assessment about how good your fighter is. But 2 Westerners who they know nothing about, they can't make an assessment. You also don't want them to make an assessment based on that, because you want a good competitive fight in Thailand. So you want to wait until they can look and see your fighter in training. Once they see them in like one training session, generally they have an idea of what level they're at and they can find an appropriate opponent for them. But the reason I'm building this comparison to watching people on TV is it in order to like see how big the shell is, you have to put it next to an object that you know how big that object is, right? So they'll put it against a nickel or they'll put it against $1. Like you'll see in crime scene photos, they'll put $1 because they don't have like a scale, they don't have like a ruler. They'll put $1 next to something so you have for scale how big something is, because everyone knows how big $1 is. If you put something next to it that nobody else knows how big that thing is, like you put it next to another shell, like, I don't know how big that is. This is what happens when you're seeing people fight against people that you don't know, right? So there are some fights on TV that like, there are two completely unknown fighters in there. And you're like, wow, this one is like way more skilled than the other one in this fight. And then you watch that fighter who you thought was so skilled in another fight and they don't look like that anymore, and it's because they're fighting someone different. I've had so many experiences where I've fought an opponent and then when I see them fight someone else, I'm like, God damn, why doesn't she fight like that against me? And it's because she can't. I have a very different style than the person that she's fighting against in that fight. I watched a girl that I fought very recently on RWS this past weekend, and she didn't look that bad against me. It was Karchuk, so it's like, it's not scoring. It's not like trying to do like, hi honey, this dog wants to bite me. It's not point scoring because there's no points in Karchuk. And I'm small. Like I was outweighed by probably 5-6 kilos by this girl. Then she goes and she fights at RWS, which is not the same style. They do give points. There is like kind of sniping scoring, and she's fighting someone who's her same size. And she looked horrible. Like she looked really, really bad. And I'm like, if you only watch this fight, you're like, this is a terrible fighter. But then you can go watch her fight against me and you're like, this person's not terrible. Like she looks way more balanced and way more aware of what she's throwing and stuff like that. And again, it's just like, you kind of have to have something to scale. So I get kind of frustrated by fighters who get like promoted and built up and like given fights by people who they will look good against. And that's what promoting is, like it's not like a horrible thing. That's what a promoter's job is if they're building a particular fighter. That's why you'll get people complaining about certain boxers who like, oh, he never fought anybody. He dodged this person, or like MMA fighters, so like, oh, he dodged all the greatest, like so that they can build their record or whatever the thing is. But people can only say that, and they can only know that if they follow the pool and know the pool of who they think that fighter should be fighting and isn't. Fighting doesn't happen in a vacuum, Like, you can't just be like, oh, this person's so great because I saw one fight of theirs. Like, sometimes I'll be watching a fight on Sunday on Channel 7. Channel 7 has really good fights until the main event. The main event is always awful. But they have some really good young fighters, and I'll be watching them, and I'm like, I can see that this one's skill set is creating a lot of problems for the other one. And so you have to kind of like wait for the later rounds to be like, oh, is he going to be able to solve this or not? Which is interesting. That's what narrative scoring looks like, and that's what narrative fighting looks like. But I don't know. I can't make like a universal statement about how good that fighter is when I've only seen them fight against one other person, and I don't know the scale of that other person, There's a lot of twins that fight at Boomdexian. So Boomdexian is this gym that Karahat has taught students at quite a few times. So they have a bunch of twins. They have like 3 or 4 sets of twins. And 2 of the sets are very, very famous. So if you know Kunsuk Lek and Kunsuk Noi, they're like 118, 120 pounds. Kunsuk Lek is amazing. Kunsuk Noi is also really great, but he's just the like lesser twin. There's always like a lesser twin. And then Yod Pet Ek and Yod Pet To are the littler ones. So they fight at like 38 to 42 kilos. And whenever you see in an Ek and a To, in twins, Ek is usually the better one. I don't know why this is. Ek is a higher rank, but I don't know how they would know to name them when they're so little. Like, one is already better at that time. I don't know. It's crazy. But this is a fun thing with Thai names, with like fight names. If you see Ek there might not be a toe, but if you see a toe, that is definitely a twin who has an egg. And then sometimes they'll use like Noi and Lek and stuff between twins. So they have like a Hong Kong Noi and Hong Kong Lek, were the twins who opened Hong Kong Muay Thai in Chiang Mai. Whatever, getting into my Thai names again. But this is the thing, like when I'm watching Kun Suk Lek, who's so good, you actually can see like you can see the challenges he's facing against each one of his opponents, because he kind of struggled in the earlier rounds and then he just blasts ahead. Like by the scoring rounds, he usually takes like a terrific lead, which is really exciting. And you're not looking at his limitations, like you're looking at the decisions that he's making, which is really interesting. And Wang Chinoy just fought. So Wang Chinoy's from the Golden Age. He's 57 years old in May, and he just had a fight this past weekend against another, not like a high-level Golden Age fighter, but from a very famous gym and similar age, named Sirat from the Pong Salong gym. And so it's an exhibition fight. It's only 3 rounds. But he had talked to me, like chatted with me online before this fight, and he's like, I've heard rumors that he might take this fight really seriously, so I'm preparing myself for him to make it real. And it's one of these things with an exhibition fight where you're never sure whether someone's going to take it really seriously or not. There's an exhibition fight between Boon Lai and Rotnarong. And Rotnarong is like kind of the original Sanchai. Like he does a lot of like trips and flips, and he claims he started the cartwheel kick and all these different kinds of things. So he's that kind of fighter. So of course he's going to do that kind of stuff in his exhibition fight. It's like how Sanchai has to do his cartwheel kick in every single fight, whether he wants to or not. It's like a signature move. So Rotnarong has to fight in this like really kind of fancy, tricky, you know, like flippy way. But he kind of made it real in a like dick way. These guys are old. Like these guys are not in shape or training. And it kind of felt nasty. He threw Boon Lai on the ground. I think Boon Lai got concussed. It's kind of nasty. But in the Wang Chinoy fight, like Wang Chinoy was doing things that he has done in his style that he will never forget. Like he was putting pressure on this guy without standing directly in front. Like he was moving in and out, but he was putting pressure on him in a way that was really amazing. And it's one of these things he had said to me before the fight. He's like, a tiger never loses its stripes. And he was saying like he has this kind of, he has teeth, he has claws. So if this guy decides to make it real, like he's ready to protect himself. And the thing I was telling Kevin when we were watching it is like when you're watching older fighters who like, they're not going to go into a 5-round fight and like have the kind of wars they had when they were 25 years old or whatever the thing is. But there's an element of them that they never lose, and you're not looking at what he can't do anymore. You're not like, oh, if only he had power, or like, oh, if only he had stamina. You're not looking at what he doesn't have. You can totally see all the things that he does still have that are so beautiful and so amazing. And you can't see that unless you know what that fighter, what their silhouette is, right? Like Karahat is going to be 57 pretty soon, also in May. And he's still Karahat. Like everything he does is still completely Karahat. And it's not like, oh, you know, he's so reduced by age or whatever. He's like still totally there. And I don't know Western boxers that well, but I saw a video of Tyson, and I think they labeled it as him being 57 years old, and he's slightly off balance, which you can only see if you're like looking for what he used to look like. He still looks amazing. He's hitting pads, and you're like, this is not a lack of anything. Like this is all just kind of no excessive movement, incredible, like you can never take this away from a fighter kind of thing. And that's the kind of thing that like, no matter when you watch that fighter, you're not gonna be like, oh, he can't fight, he sucks, he got totally like bulldozed by this other guy. Which people totally talk about fighters now, like when they watch a fight and they've never seen either of the fighters. Whichever one won is absolutely amazing, and whichever one lost is total shit. It's like, people don't want to watch fights. Like they just want to watch some kind of beatdown or like ass kicking or something. Like there's actually strategy and engagement and like, what is it? There's this thing that Kun Suk Lek does, where he'll throw a strike and then he'll stiffen his entire posture exactly where he lands it. This is something that like lots of fighters in the Golden Age did, where they'll throw a kick and then they create a bar out of their shin so that if you try to step in after it, you're being barred. So it's like a kick into a block. He does it with his entire body. And you can see what he's doing. You can see the strategy of what he's doing. And you're like, oh, is this guy going to be able to solve that or not? And it's so exciting and it's so interesting to see. It's so boring to be like, is this person's relentless chain punching going to win this fight? Like, it's that, I don't know why people find that exciting, but they do. Like, people love that kind of thing. I don't know why. But maybe it's one of those things where like things that are just naturally very technical, like jiu-jitsu is very technical. It's boring if you can't see it. Like, you're like, why are these people just laying on each other? I remember when the UFC started standing people up a lot and people were complaining. They're like, nobody gets to work on the ground anymore. They're always breaking people. They're always standing people up. And it was people who knew how to watch jiu-jitsu who were like, this is bullshit. Like, why are they doing this? I don't want to see two people who can't strike very well. Let them go to the ground. Let them work it out on the ground. Jiu-jitsu is a patience game. That's like clinch. I'm like, let them work on it. Like, let them figure it out. It'd be like if in a super technical thing like jiu-jitsu, they were like, I like the guy who outweighs the other one by 20 pounds and can just lay on him. Like, that's my favorite. That's what it's like to have someone who just kind of combos their way through a fight. It can win. Like, strategically speaking, good idea if you just want to win. But if you want to actually like fight, you want to have like an art form, that's not really how anyone at a high level actually fights. And I've won fights in the earlier part of my career. I've won a lot of fights simply by grabbing and kneeing and, you know, wearing my opponent down, which is a good strategy. Like, people will get worn down and they will get hurt and not want to fight anymore. But I've spent more than a decade now in Thailand trying to shape around that and build on top of that and then scrape away and carve away in order to create actually fighting, like actual skill sets, and like being in a state where you can solve a person. Like, you're trying to solve the person who's in front of you instead of like, anyone who goes in front of me, I can do the same combination, and if I do it hard enough and strong enough and fast enough, it'll beat anybody. And there are entire schools of fighters now. I won't talk shit. And it's not even a negative thing. Like, this is actually a mark for them. There's a gym that has a number of female fighters, and they taught them a really, really strong, straight right cross, and it fucking works. Women fighting other women who don't block super well, just throwing an incredibly straight right hand, they can overwhelm and knock out and hurt opponents that way. And totally props to them. Like, that is a very, very useful tool to give to your fighters. But it's one of these things where you're like, every woman from that gym has this right hand, and you know that they're just going to be throwing that right hand. So you can solve every woman in the gym all at once by solving that right hand. And of course they have styles within them. Like, they're not a monolith. They don't actually all fight like each other. But by and large, what's winning them fights, or what's getting them an edge in these fights, is just a really, really straight right hand. And that's a mark against the entire fight game. Not a mark against them, not a mark against their particular opponents. It's that this thing needs to be solved, and people need to become more complicated as fighters. Like, for the longest time, when Westerners would come to Thailand, they just could not clinch at all, because we don't learn it outside of Thailand. It's not taught outside of Thailand. So you could, no matter what you're doing, if you're starting to get overwhelmed by a Westerner, you could just go into the clinch and you could beat any Westerner in the clinch. And that's not complicated fighting. That's not like a super technique strategy. That's having a technique beyond their capacity, which should not be like a right punch, but at times can be, depending on how big the holes are in any fighter's arsenal or defense or whatever the thing is. So I don't know. I've gone on and on about this, but basically, I'm disappointed by the idea that people think they can watch one fight and have a universal view and understanding of what either of those fighters are like. And in the same way that you're not supposed to make universals about yourself, mentally. You shouldn't do it about other people. And this goes into the same thing that, like, Kevin has always said to me, you're never as good as you think you are when you win, and you're never as bad as you think you are when you lose. Because those things are kind of emotional, and it depends on who you're fighting. So there are people who can make you look much worse than you actually are, and there are opponents that can make you look much, much better than you actually are. And you can fight the same person 3 times and look good and bad back and forth, depending on the choices you're making and how you're trying to solve certain things that that person presents to you. Like, they present certain obstacles to you, and you can solve it really well in one fight and not able to solve it in another fight. And that's fighting. Like, that's what fighting is. That's what's an art form about the fight, is that you're actually engaging with another person with another will in the ring with you. It's will against will. There's something incredibly boring about the idea that you just had the right, like, cheat codes or combos or whatever to get through that one level in the video game. My first serious boyfriend was really, really into video games, and that was where I learned the idea of cheat codes, which I don't even know if they have them anymore, but this was back in the 2000s and early 2000s. This whole idea of, like, you could not beat a game, and so you would go in and, like, go online, or I think there were magazines that you could subscribe to that would have, like, cheat codes or ways to beat levels. There are people whose entire job was to, like, play and write about these games and, like, learn how to solve them and then write these articles for other people and that kind of thing. And it's like, what a completely different way to play a video game, where you're like, I want to beat this game faster than I did the last time, or, like, with no mistakes. Or I remember in Resident Evil, he would get to a save point, and then he would go play that same level again and try to save bullets, like use fewer bullets than he had. And, like, not my idea of a fun way to play a game, but definitely creating challenges for himself. So the idea of people, like, making fighting the entire art and the entire path and the entire personal challenge of fighting, turning that into, like, cheat codes, or how few losses you can have, or, like, how many belts you can have, or I don't know, whatever the things are. Like, have your own goals. I'm not telling people to change their goals, but don't lose track of what the actual beautiful process of learning how to fight and being in a fight and being good at fighting is. And don't take that away from other people by reducing them to their win or their loss in a single fight on TV. That's lame. Yeah. All right. Sylvie out.